Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the White House. And again, let me say, welcome to Washington and to the NATO Summit. Some of you know that I am quite a fan of music, and I found a little-known bit of history related to the founding of NATO 50 years ago. When the original North Atlantic Treaty was signed, the United States Marine Band, which was in the auditorium playing for us today, was in the auditorium then, playing a group of songs from George Gershwin's famous opera Porgy and Bess. The two songs they played were, "I Got Plenty of Nothing," and "It Ain't Necessarily So." Well, I think after 50 years, we can still appreciate Gershwin, but the songs were poorly timed because NATO has had plenty of substance and its word has been necessarily so. In 1949, when we entered NATO, it signaled a radical departure in America's history because we had been warned from the time of our first president, George Washington, against entangling alliances with other nations. But we learned the hard way after World War I that the warning was no longer valid in the 20th century. In the last 50 years, all of us have become more and more involved with events beyond our borders because we have seen increasingly how they affect the lives of people within our borders, and how the values we espouse at home must be defended abroad. That is in large measure what we are trying to do in Kosovo, to protect the innocent families, the children, and to stand for the values that we have stood for as an organization for 50 years now. We owe a great debt of gratitude to our founders, to the generation of people after the Second World War who constructed a world of freedom that stood against tyranny and eventually helped to end the Cold War. We can best pay that debt by standing up for those values today, including meeting our responsibilities to the children and the future of Southeastern Europe and the terrible suffering of Kosovo. Mr. Secretary General, I want to say a special word of thanks to you for your steadfast leadership, for your continuing reminder to all of us that we must both do our duty and stay together as we do it. Tomorrow we will focus on Kosovo again, but we will also look to the larger issues of the 21st century. Again, I compliment you on your leadership, and I thank all of our colleagues for their input. We will look back on this summit, I think, and say, well, it wasn't one of those traditional meetings where we got to have a lot of fun and a lot of laughs because we were so gravely concerned with the suffering of the people in the Balkans. But it was a profoundly important one because it reminded us of why we got started, what we have to do tomorrow, and what it is that gives our alliance meaning in this present day. I'd like to ask all of you to join me in a toast to Secretary General and Mrs. Solana and to NATO and its future. Thank you. Secretary General.
Mr. President, Mr. Clinton, dear friends, I don't have much to say after a long day of long speeches full of meaning. But I would like to say at least three things which are related to one word. The word is thank you. Thank you to you, Mr. President, for your hospitality, for your leadership, for your contribution to maintain this alliance with all the movement and all the energy that it has. Probably without your commitment from the very beginning, Mr. President, the situation and the involvement that we all together have gotten into Kosovo would have been much more difficult. The second word of thanks is to all of you, to the leaders of the different countries of the alliance that have decided to go together not only to proclaim principles, but to defend principles. We have proclaimed principles in many, many occasions. Now we're going beyond that, proclaiming the principles and defending the principles. And the third word of thank you has to be to the men and women in uniform, that some of them at this very time will be defending freedom, defending values, as we are having here at this dinner. Let's remember them. But Mr. President, let me say a word about tomorrow. Tomorrow we are going to debate not only Kosovo, but also the future. And I would like to say a word from the bottom of my heart about how this organization has evolved, has adapted. As many of you know, I do not become from the world of diplomacy. In my previous incarnation, I was a professor of theoretical physics, and I know very well that motion is a relative concept. You move in relation to something. And that which is true for natural sciences is also true for history, I think. And an organization has to move according to the time, and has to move faster than the backdrop. And let's suppose that backdrop is history. When history moves very fast, as is taking place in these years, the organizations that will want to be relevant, they have to move faster than history, faster than the backdrop, if they want to be relevant for the future. I like to say that all of you have made this organization to adapt at a rhythm that probably none of the organizations that were born after the Second Great War have done it. And that's why we are involved now in this conflict, defending values, and we are going to prevail. Because we have been prepared from the very beginning to take decisions rapidly, to adapt rapidly to the new circumstances. To all of you who have the leaders of this alliance, who have taken the responsibility, thank you very, very much. On behalf not only of your people, but on behalf of the people collectively considered of all the alliance. Thank you very much. I think we are going to live difficult moments, but we are going to win. No question about that. With leaders like you, people like you, there's no question that we will prevail. And the values that we are going to defend will be defended, and never again in the territory of Europe something will happen like the things were happening now. Mr. President, thank you very much. And let me ask you, please, to accompany me on a toast to all of you, the leaders of this alliance.
Yes, of course.
Good morning and welcome to you all. For 50 successful years, the North Atlantic Alliance has been dedicated to the creation of a secure, stable, and undivided Europe. We meet today to decide how best the Alliance should fulfill that historical mission in the years ahead. There can be no more eloquent proof of the Alliance commitment to the creation of a secure, stable, and undivided Europe than the presence here today of the leaders of the new allies, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. The accession of the three countries to the Alliance bears witness to our achievement of the last 50 years and to the vision shown by the original signatories of the North Atlantic Treaty. We have a duty to our publics to show that the same vision today, to look ahead and plan for the future, even as we confront in Kosovo a stern challenge to security, stability, and well-being in Europe. Our action in Kosovo shows that the countries of NATO together possess the necessary resolve and the necessary determination. We are pledged to uphold the basic principles of democracy, individual liberty, respect for human rights against Milosevic's onslaught. We reconfirm this unity of purpose at our first session yesterday morning. It is our task this morning to make the Alliance fit for the 21st century so we can continue to rely on it as the guarantor of our security and common values in the years and decades ahead. With this, I would like to offer the floor to our host, the President of the United States, President Clinton. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. Yesterday, we recalled NATO's history, embraced our new members, deepened our unity and our determination to stand against ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, and to build a broader transatlantic community that respects human rights and of all ethnic and religious groups and offers all Europeans the chance to build better lives together. I want to begin by thanking the Secretary General for his leadership. I thank all of you for your leadership and your unity, the Foreign and Defense Ministers, General Naumann and General Clark, and all the people in our governments who work so hard to support our efforts. I know I speak for all of us when I say we are very proud of our men and women in uniform in the Balkans, and we remember today especially the three who are being held prisoner by Mr. Milosevic and who still have not received the Red Cross visits required by the Geneva Convention, even though he is on television in the United States saying they will receive them. The crisis in Kosovo has underscored the importance of NATO and the imperative of modernizing our alliance for 21st century challenges. Today, we will embrace a comprehensive plan to do just that, so that NATO can advance security and freedom for another 50 years by enhancing our capacity to address conflicts beyond our borders, by protecting our citizens from terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, by deepening our partnerships with other nations, and helping new members enter through NATO's open doors. In preparing NATO for the 21st century, we will make our alliance even stronger. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to read a brief statement, after which we will entertain questions alternating from the American Press Corps and from the International Press Corps here. We have just about completed the first 2 days of our NATO meeting, welcoming new members, adopting very important changes to make NATO operations more relevant and more effective in meeting the new challenges of the 21st century. We have also reaffirmed our determination on Kosovo to get the Serb forces out, to get the refugees back home under the protection of an international security force moving towards self-government. Yesterday, we sent a strong message of support to the frontline states who have risked and sacrificed so very much in this crisis. NATO will respond to any actions by Serbia against its neighbors as a result of NATO presence on their territory during this crisis, or to any move to undermine the democratically elected government of Montenegro. We also express our support for a genuine democratic transition in Serbia. For 5 years now, we have been working to build a new NATO prepared to deal with the security challenges of the new century. Today, we reaffirmed our readiness in appropriate circumstances to address regional and ethnic conflicts beyond the territory of NATO members. I am pleased that our strategic concept specifically endorses the actions such as those we are now undertaking in Kosovo. Now, this afternoon, we will meet with President Kuchma to advance our cooperation with Ukraine. Tonight and tomorrow, we will gather with 23 of NATO's partner nations. The Partnership for Peace, launched in 1994, the Euro-Atlantic Partnership, started in 1997, have clearly exceeded expectations. 16 partner nations are now serving with NATO in Bosnia. Our forces have conducted literally hundreds of exercises with forces from partner countries. These are the nations of Central and Eastern Europe, of the Caucasus and Central Asia, whose futures are clearly intertwined with ours. Our alliance also recognizes the tremendous importance of Russia to Europe's future, and we are determined to support Russia's transition to stronger democracy and more effective free markets, and to strengthen our partnership with Russia. We work closely with Russia for a peaceful solution for Kosovo at Rambouillet. While our allied nations all agree that the offer Mr. Milosevic has apparently made to former Prime Minister Chernomyrdin on Thursday was inadequate, nevertheless, we welcome Russia's efforts and hope they will continue and ultimately result in Serb agreement to our conditions so that we can reverse the ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. That concludes my statement. Go ahead. Sandra?
More tanks and more troops to the Balkans. American reserves will be called up. NATO may well end up searching ships as part of an oil embargo, and still Milosevic is not backing down. What specific assurances can you give the American people that we are not drifting into a long and endless conflict with no end in sight?
Well, we are not drifting, we are moving forward with a strategy that I believe strongly will succeed, one that we have reaffirmed here and intensified. I think the important thing for everyone to understand is that in order for this strategy to succeed, we need two things. One, vigorous execution, and two, patience. Keep in mind, we now know from the evidence that has come out that the campaign Mr. Milosevic and the Serb leaders have carried out against the people of Kosovo was planned in detail last year. It was not executed in October, in no small measure because of the threat of action by NATO. It was executed when we began our air campaign. They had 40,000 troops in and around Kosovo and almost 300 tanks. It takes time to reverse that, but we are working on it, and we will prevail if we execute well with real determination and if we have the patience I would remind all of you that it may seem like a long time. I don't think that this air campaign has been going on a particularly long time. In the Persian Gulf, there were 44 days of bombing before there was any kind of land action. And the land was flatter, the targets were clearer, the weather was better. We are doing what needs to be done here with great vigor, and I am convinced we will prevail if we have the patience. We have to be prepared not only to execute with determination, but to pay the price of time. Yes?
On the European pillar in NATO, are you satisfied that the outcome in the statement will not allow a split to occur between the European forces and the American forces? And specifically, what role will the Western European Union, WEU, play?
Well, first of all, I think the language speaks for itself. Europe will have to decide exactly how to constitute this force and also how to make it effective. One of the things I think that will receive nearly no publicity during this meeting, obviously because of the appropriate dominance of Kosovo in the news, is the document we adopted today that deals with the European Security Initiative, but also deals with what we can do to make all of our efforts more effective, including enhancing the defense capabilities of all of our allies. As long as this operation, however it's constituted by the Europeans, operates within and cooperation with NATO, I think it will strengthen the capability of the alliance, and I think it will actually help to maintain America's involvement with NATO. We have members of the Congress here today. Senator Ross, sitting here on the front row, has been one of the strongest supporters of our partnership with NATO and with our European allies, but I believe this is a very, very positive thing. The details are for the Europeans to decide, and you should ask them that. But as long as it's consistent with the Berlin Principle, that it's separable but not separate from NATO, I think it will work very well. Helen?
The buildup of American troops and their allied troops in Macedonia and Albania seem to smack of potential intervention, military intervention, despite ground troops, all your protestations.
Is that a question?
That's a question. I mean, is that true?
No. The short answer is no. Let me remind you, we are in Macedonia and Albania to try to help them, two very brave countries with very strong-willed leaders operating under extreme duress. We're trying to help them manage a massive refugee problem. And in Albania, we have troops there also to secure the helicopter operation we have put in there, and to make sure that we can secure it not only as it's moved in, but as it becomes operational. Yes, ma'am.
How much of a guarantee can countries in the Southeast Europe region get that they will actually be an important part of the reconstruction once the Kosovo conflict is over?
Well, that is what we will deal with tomorrow when we meet with the leaders of all those nations. Last week I went to San Francisco to speak to the American newspaper editors to outline what I believe is an essential part of the long-term solution to the problems of the Balkans and Southeast Europe generally. They are not yet sufficiently a part of the future we all imagine for Europe in the 21st century, which is not only peace and stability, but also prosperity and shared decision-making. So my view is that we should do more to draw those nations closer to one another, to give them a positive reason to work together and to properly treat the ethnic minorities within their borders and work out ways for them to participate in the life of their country, as well as to maintain their own religious and cultural traditions. And we should work out ways for the nations of that region to relate more closely to all the European institutions and to Canada and the United States and North America. So to me, This will not work over the long run. If you don't want to see this repeated, what we're doing now, it is not enough to defeat this moment of aggression and to reverse it and to send the Kosovars back home. We are going to have to create an alternative, positive future. We know what the history of ethnic animosity in the Balkans is. We know that there is not a single ethnic group, even the Serbs, who cannot cite some historic example of legitimate grievance that can be manipulated by an unscrupulous politician. So what we need, with all these magnets pulling the people apart, we need a powerful set of magnets pulling the people together. And those have to be economic as well as political and security. So the NATO open door policy, the European Union's open door policy, the prospect of new cooperation with all the states of Southeastern Europe among themselves and with Europe and the United States and Canada, I think this is a very, very important thing. Over the long run, we have to do this. We have to create a positive future for this part of Europe if we want to avoid being in the very position we're in today, again in a few years in another place. Yes, Larry.
Mr. President, there seems to be a great deal of concern about the oil embargo that NATO has endorsed. The French are expressing concern that if military force is used to enforce it, that it would amount to an act of war. I'm wondering, do you agree with that assessment? And are you concerned that on one hand you're encouraging the Russians to try to negotiate a settlement, and on the other hand they may be caught in the middle of an oil embargo clash?
Well, of course, I hope that won't happen. But let me tell you where we're coming from. We sent our pilots into the air to destroy the oil refinery and supply systems of Serbia. And they did so successfully. They risked their lives to do it. How can we justify risking the lives of the pilots to go up and destroy the refinery and the supply capacity of Serbia and then say, but it's okay with us if people want to continue to supply this nation and its outlaw actions in Kosovo in another way? So what we have done is we've asked our ministers of defense to come up with a plan that will apply in an even-handed way. Obviously, we don't expect it to, and we will not do anything to try to see that it leads to violence, but we have to be firm about it. And if we want this campaign to succeed with economic and political pressure and with the air action, then we have to take every reasonable means to give it the chance to succeed, and that's what we intend to do. Yes, sir.
The Austrian former Prime Minister Franz Ranitzky was proposed by Secretary General Kofi Annan as a possible candidate for a peace mission to Kosovo. Would you kindly explain to us whether this has your approval and what you would expect from such a mission?
Well, I can't respond to your specific question for a very simple reason. I did not know which individuals were being considered by the Secretary General until a couple of hours ago. So I have no direct, I've had no direct communication with the Secretary General, nor have I even discussed it with the members of my staff. I have, as it happens, known Mr. Brunetsky for many years. I knew him before I was president, before I was a candidate for president. I have an enormously high regard for him personally. But in order to make a judgment about that, I would have to have a clear idea about exactly what it is, what is the mission, and what would be the parameters of it. So I can't really comment on the specifics, but I do have a very high regard for him personally. I think he's an excellent man. Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, a lot of people have a clear understanding when you authorize bombing missions against military targets, tanks, armor, military headquarters, but they have a little bit more difficulty understanding why you would authorize bombing Serb television in the middle of the night, knowing there are journalists working there, knowing there are cleaning crews there, knowing these people have no choice but to work there, and also knowing that within a matter of hours, Serb TV would be back on the air from other locations. So the question is, what goes through your mind knowing you're going to in effect authorized the killing of these people for questionable military gains?
Our military leaders at NATO believe, based on what they have seen and what others in the area have told them, that the Serb television is an essential instrument of Mr. Milosevic's command and control. He uses it to spew hatred and to basically spread disinformation. He does not use it to show all the Kosovar villages he's burned, to show the mass graves, to show the children that have been raped by the soldiers that he sent there. It is not, in a conventional sense, therefore, a media outlet. That was a decision they made, and I did not reverse it, and I believe that I did the right thing in not reversing that decision. Yes, sir.
President, the new strategic concept practically legitimate NATO action beyond the borders. How far geographically NATO will go?
I don't think it's a geographical issue. I think that what we tried to do was to say that there are some things which can occur in Europe, in non-member nations, that can affect the security and stability of all of Europe, including NATO members. And I think the language should speak for itself. Sam?
President, before the air campaign began, Pentagon planners advised you, according to reports that have not been denied, that the air campaign could degrade, it could damage, it could diminish, but it could not by itself stop the killing on the ground in Kosovo if Milosevic intended to persevere. You have said again today that you will continue the air campaign and that you believe it will prevail. Have the Pentagon planners given you new advice? Have they changed their mind? And if not, sir, on what do you base your optimism?
Well, first of all, I believe that, first, the report that you have from the Pentagon planners is an accurate one, and it is what I believe to be the case at the time. Keep in mind, and I think I made this clear at the time, the reason we went forward with the air actions is because that we thought there was some chance it would deter Mr. Milosevic based on two previous examples. Number one, last October in Kosovo, when he was well poised to do the same thing. And number two, in Bosnia, where there were 12 days of NATO attacks over a 20-day period. However, I also well understood that the underlying facts were somewhat different. I still believe we did the right thing. And I believe, as one of the area's leaders said in the last couple of days, it would have been much worse had we not taken action. Now, there is a literal sense, Sam, in which from the air, you cannot take every Serbian body in a uniform on the ground in Kosovo and extract them from Kosovo and put them back in Serbia. That, I think, is self-evident to everyone. So when I tell you that I think this will work, what I mean by that is I think if we execute well, if we are determined, and if we spend enough time doing it, we will either break down his military capacity to retain control over Kosovo, or the price of staying there will be far greater than the perceived benefits. That is the logic behind the campaign, not that it will physically extract every person and put them back across the border. Everyone knows that's not true. And I believe that, I'm glad you asked the question because I think it's very important that everyone be clear on this. This is, my belief is that if we vigorously, comprehensively execute the air campaign, and if we are prepared to take the time and do our very best to care for the refugees as best we can in the meanwhile, and to provide stability and support to the frontline states, and especially to Albania and Macedonia, that we will prevail. That is what I believe. And I believe we will do it because we have the capacity to dramatically degrade his military operation, which is the instrument of his control, and because we have the capacity to make this policy very, very expensive for him militarily and economically and in other ways. Yes, sir, in the back.
Mr. President, then under this scenario that you've just laid out, doesn't mean that he would necessarily comply with the 5 conditions, which would also mean that it might be too high to keep his forces there, the cost, but then you would have to be willing to move some forces in to take the ground that they could no longer hold. And it seems at the moment there's no willingness to do that.
Our position on that, I think, is the correct one. The Secretary General has recommended a reassessment of what would be required. I think that everybody in the alliance agrees with his decision. That is the correct decision. But we have not weakened our conditions, nor will we. If anything, I think this meeting has seen not only a reaffirmation, but an intensification of our determination to see the refugees back in, the Serb forces out, an international force to protect them, and the movement towards self-government for the Kosovars. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me welcome all of you for this first meeting of the NATO. Let me welcome all of you to this meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Commission at the summit level. This meeting is another reflection of our determination to build a new undivided Europe, a Europe of partnership and cooperation. More than anything else, this gathering stands as a testament to Ukraine. Many countries in Central and Eastern Europe face a difficult transition when the Cold War came to an end. Ukraine was up to the challenge. Over the last decade, Ukraine has charted its course with vision and with courage. Today, Ukraine is not only a member of the Euro-Atlantic community, it's a vital and respected member. President Kuchma, who by now has become an old friend to many of us, deserves much of the credit for this historic success. His personal involvement was crucial for the rapid development of a NATO-Ukraine partnership. Today, we take stock of this partnership and chart the way ahead. The relationship between NATO and Ukraine is a real two-way street. NATO gains from it by having a strong cooperation partner for enhancing European security together, and Ukraine gains from it by finding a NATO and a strong supporter of its independence and of its far-reaching program of political, economic, and defense reform. The distinctive partnership between NATO and Ukraine thus provides all of us with a new model of cooperation, a model worthy of the new Europe we are building together. Let me now offer the floor to our host, President Clinton, for his welcoming remarks. President Clinton, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. Like all the NATO leaders, I am very pleased to welcome President Kuchma to this first summit meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Commission. When we launched this commission 2 years ago in Madrid, we hoped it would lead to a pragmatic and truly distinctive working partnership. Ukraine is a nation critical to our vision of an undivided, peaceful, democratic Europe. The experience of the last 2 years has vindicated our hopes. Our armed forces are working together well in Bosnia. Ukraine played a vital role in Kosovo in the verification mission until it was driven out by the regime in Belgrade. I appreciate President Kushma's efforts to persuade Mr. Milosevic to end his campaign against the Kosovar Albanians so that the Kosovar people can come home with security and self-government. Ukraine has also proposed an ambitious program of cooperation with NATO, and the alliance has agreed to establish our very first Partnership for Peace training center in the Ukrainian town of Yavoriv. Our nations also will support Ukraine's efforts to reform its economy, deepen its democracy, and advance the rule of law, all vital to Ukraine's security and the success of our partnership. When we act to maintain peace and security in Europe, we will strive to do so with our partners, including Ukraine. That is what we hope to do with Ukraine and other nations in Kosovo once peace is restored there. We have taken many practical, good steps toward realizing the promise of our partnership. But we should also not lose sight of the larger significance of what we are trying to do here, in light of the history of Ukraine and the history of Europe. For the people of Ukraine have felt the horrors of communism and fascism and famine. At different points in this century, the flags of 5 outside powers have flown over Ukrainian territory. Now Ukraine flies its own flag, and it is incumbent upon all of us to support Ukraine's transition and what its people have called their European choice. Ukraine still faces large challenges, political, economic, environmental, but now it is free to choose its destiny. And it has used that freedom to choose democracy and tolerance and free markets, integration, and the choice to dismantle its nuclear arsenal. President Kuchma's presence here is a reminder that most of Europe is coming together today. Most of Europe has rejected the idea that the quest for security is a zero-sum game in which one nation's gain is another's loss. So most of all, I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the people of the United States to express my respect and gratitude to President Kuchma and the people of Ukraine for the choices they are making, and to assure them that all of us and our partners will stand with them as they work for a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Clinton. President Kuchma, may I now open the floor to you for any introductory remarks you may want to make?
Шановний пане генеральний секретар, шановні колеги, шановні пані та панове. Насамперед хотів би подякувати нашим американським колегам і особисто президенту.
Our American colleagues and personally President Clinton for creating these conditions for successful work. I would like to express my appreciation that the relations between Ukraine and NATO, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary, are proceeding, and evidence of this is our meeting here of our commission. And there is a breaking moment in our relationship. What is happening in Kosovo has forced us to think about what we must do to change the architecture of Europe. I expect our discussion will give a new impulse and new understanding of today's realities. We should set new priorities and a new impulse to the development of relations between Ukraine and NATO.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. Mr. Secretary General, Mrs. Solana, allies and friends, it's a great honor for Hillary and for me to welcome the largest group of world leaders ever to assemble in Washington, here to the White House on this beautiful spring evening. Just a few years ago, a gathering of all the nations here in partnership would have been unthinkable. But we are all here tonight because we are thinking. We are thinking of a future brighter than the past, a future of shared values and shared visions, a future in which we define national greatness by its commitment to human rights and mutual respect, not to ethnic and religious bigotry, in which we measure the success of nations by how well we lift people up, not by how much we tear them down. In a world full of both promise and peril, where for good or ill our destinies are more and more linked, we have chosen to be allies, partners, and friends. In an age most observers defined by the rise of modern technology, modern scientific breakthroughs, a modern global economy, it is ironic and painful that all over the world, and of course especially in Kosovo, the peace is threatened by the oldest demon of society, the fear and hatred of the other, those who are of a different race or ethnic background or religion. Just a few days ago, a voice from the age we honor at this 50th Anniversary Summit spoke to us from his home in Poland. Marek Edelman, a hero of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, published a letter here in an American newspaper urging all of us to persevere in Kosovo. I know, he wrote, like all of my generation, that freedom has and must have its price. Tonight we remember that the burden of defending freedom and peace is lighter when it is shouldered by so many. And we remember that the cause of freedom and peace is stronger when it is embraced by a group of nations as great and diverse as those who are joined together in this council. And so I ask all of you to join me now in a toast to the leaders and the people of the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council. And thank you very much. Mr. Secretary General. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, Presidents, Prime Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 50 years ago, when the North Atlantic Treaty was signed, only 12 countries were represented here in Washington. Today, the head of states and government of more than 40 countries are attending the commemoration of that anniversary. You are present here is the most vivid demonstration of how much our world has changed, and changed, no doubt, for the better. Today, every country in the Euro-Atlantic area can come around the same table to discuss security issues and work out ways to address those issues together. Never before in history has there been such a strong cooperative momentum. Never before have we seen so many nations working together for the same end, for the same goals. Indeed, if there is anything our meetings today and tomorrow demonstrate, beyond any doubt, it is that cooperation and partnership have become firmly established as basic principles throughout the Euro-Atlantic area. These cooperative ties must be strengthened further. The Euro-Atlantic area is still troubled by violent conflict in many places. To make all the Euro-Atlantic area a zone of peace, a zone of stability, we must tighten the web of cooperation even more. But we must also be prepared to act in support of principles, the principles we proclaim to uphold. Many of our partners are playing a key role in NATO's efforts to bring a just peace to Kosovo. I thank them for all of that. And let me assure that they, in turn, can count on NATO support in these challenging times. Dear friends, we're living difficult moments, but it's great to see you all around. And as I said, principles not only have to be proclaimed, but have to be defended. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Let me ask you, please, to raise on a toast for this extraordinary partnership. Thank you very much. NATO allies, the 7 countries neighboring the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. We meet at a time of crisis in Kosovo, and no one knows better the full impact of that crisis than those living in the immediate neighborhood. The NATO allies are conscious of the hardship and difficulties the crisis has brought to your region. For some countries, such as Albania and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, the flow of refugees across your borders and the problem of providing humanitarian aid on a massive scale has required efforts nothing short of heroic. NATO, along with other international organizations and individual countries, has tried to help, and we will continue to do so. We want to work with you and other countries for security and stability in the region. The NATO allies are grateful for the support which countries in the region have provided, from hosting NATO forces to granting space access and providing logistical support. Such solidarity in support of the international community's objectives in Kosovo is a sure sign of our eventual success. As you know, Kosovo was the subject of a special meeting on Friday, at which the allies reaffirmed the determination to carry forward the action in Kosovo to a successful conclusion. We will not waver. We must and we shall succeed. I will open the floor for discussion, offering the opportunity first to the neighboring countries for their views, both on the immediate situation and for any reflection they wish to make on a broad regional strategy for the future. But before doing that, let me offer the floor to President Clinton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. We want to welcome the leaders of all the frontline states here and say that we are very grateful for what you have done. The people of Albania and Macedonia have welcomed almost 500,000 refugees to their countries, often literally into their homes. You have shared what you have, though the strains are immense. NATO is working to relieve your burden with the United Nations, building camps, providing supplies, helping to bring more refugees to other countries until they can return to Kosovo. We must do more, intensifying our relief operations, taking our share of refugees. The nations of the region have risked and even faced armed confrontation with Serbia by facilitating and supporting our campaign to end the bloodshed in Kosovo. Yesterday, or Friday, NATO made its position very clear. We said unambiguously, if Belgrade challenges its neighbors as a result of the presence of NATO, we will respond. The nations of the region have faced enormous economic dislocation and losses. We are committed to working with you and with multilateral institutions to ease your emergency needs and help you with your debts. You want a better future for your nations and your region, and there as well, we are committed to help. Many of us have tried to lay out a vision for the region, a positive alternative to the violence and ethnic hatred, a vision of people and nations working together, bridging old divides, forging a common future of peace, freedom, and prosperity. How do we get there? First of all, we must prevail in Kosovo. A just end to the conflict is essential to putting the entire region on the path to stability. Second, we must strengthen our efforts to support economic development and deeper democracy, ethnic and religious tolerance, and regional integration in Southeastern Europe. We must build on the many positive ways in which the nations of the region, often with our support, already are bringing change at home and cooperation across borders. In that regard, I want to especially commend Slovenia's strong efforts in recent years to reach out to its neighbors. We will work toward the day when all the people of the region, including the Serbs now suffering under reckless tyranny, enjoy freedom and live together. This will require a commitment by nations of the region to continue political and economic reforms, and I particularly respect the efforts of Bulgaria and Romania in this regard, to stick with their programs under very difficult circumstances. It will require that we sustain our engagement. I welcome the suggestion of the German EU presidency to hold a conference in Bonn next month to advance these common efforts. I hope our finance ministers, when they meet here next week with international financial institutions, will explore imaginative and aggressive ways for us to help. Finally, we must continue to strengthen the security bonds between your countries and NATO. 5 of the nations here are NATO partners. Yesterday, NATO and its partners agreed to deepen our security engagement. We will continue to work with Bosnia and Croatia on implementation of the Dayton Accords, looking toward eventual partnership. And yesterday, NATO adopted a robust membership action plan to help aspiring nations strengthen their candidacy so they can enter NATO. New members will bolster our alliance and Europe's security. In all the countries present here today, leaders and citizens are working to realize a vision just the opposite of Mr. Milosevic's, reaching across the divides to pursue shared dreams of a better life. All of them are on the right road, and we must travel it with them to ensure that they succeed. Thank you very much.
Today's meeting underscores the importance we all attach to this unique forum. Since the EAPC was launched 2 years ago, its focus has been on forging stronger cooperative ties among our countries. Over the last 2 years, the EAPC has shown a remarkable capacity to adapt and evolve with the new security challenges. Our agenda has become more elaborate, more comprehensive. Our political consultation has become more substantive and more focused. Today, the Euro-Atlantic area is still troubled by violent conflict. Nationalism and ethnic strife persist and pose a direct challenge to the values and to the principles we all share, and which are the basis for the Euro-Atlantic culture of cooperation. By strengthening our ties further, we can move closer to our goal of a durable Euro-Atlantic peace. A cooperative approach to security remains our only viable option. I want to thank all the partners for being here today with us, for working with us to build our common culture of cooperation in the positive atmosphere of this forum. Let me now pass the floor to our host for the Washington Summit, President Clinton. President Clinton, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. First of all, I would like to join you in welcoming all the members of our Partnership Council. From Central Asia to North America, from the Mediterranean to the Baltic, this Council and the Partnership for Peace are building a region of shared values and shared endeavors. Many nations in this room indeed are accepting risks and hardships to support the peace in southeastern Europe. To be sure, there are challenges to our common vision of a Europe undivided, democratic, and at peace. The challenge of overcoming instability and economic hardship in the Balkans, of defeating those who employ ethnic hatred in the service of power, the challenge of integrating a democratic Russia into the European mainstream, the challenge of averting a gulf between Europe and the Islamic world, the challenge of resolving tensions in the Aegean. We must see reducing conflict and tensions and increasing prosperity and integration as two sides of the same coin. Therefore, as we fight against ethnic hatred in Kosovo, we must fight for the rebuilding of southeastern Europe and the integration of the region into the larger European community. We must continue to strengthen the partnership for peace and deepen the role that our partner countries play in the planning and execution of the missions we undertake together. We must continue to build on our cooperation with Russia, with Ukraine, with all the members of this Council to advance the interests and ideals we share. We must continue the enlargement of NATO, the Partnership for Peace, and the Partnership Council. All of these things, I am convinced, will make Europe stronger and freer and more stable. And I think that I can speak for my friend, Mr. Chrétien, when I say that those of us in North America strongly support it. As I said last night at our dinner, if you look around this room, the idea that all of us could be sitting here together around one table would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. We are here around this table together because we are thinking about our common future, and that is the best thing to say about this meeting today. Hello. I am going to read a statement, and I have to go, unfortunately, to another appointment, but Secretary Albright, Secretary Cohen, Mr. Bailey, General Shelton are going to be available to answer questions. We came to this summit committed to chart a course for the NATO alliance for the 21st century, one that embraces new members, new partners, and new missions. Here we committed NATO, first, to fulfill its mission of collective defense with the ability to meet new security threats. Second, to remain open to new allies and to seek stronger partnerships with nations all across Europe, Central Asia, and obviously including Ukraine and Russia. We've also reaffirmed our determination repeatedly to intensify our actions, military and economic, until we achieve our objectives in Kosovo. On this, the alliance leaves Washington more united even than it was when we came here. Meanwhile, we will stand by the neighboring countries that have accepted risks and hardship in support of this effort. If Mr. Milosevic threatens them for helping us, we will respond. And we will work to support democracy and development in the region so that the forces pulling people together will be stronger than those pulling them apart, and all nations, including someday a democratic Serbia, can join the European mainstream. What NATO did here this weekend was to reaffirm our commitment to a common future, rooted in common humanity. Standing against ethnic cleansing is both a moral imperative and a practical necessity. As the leaders of the frontline states who have so much at stake in the outcome made so clear to us, our vision of a Europe undivided, democratic, free, and at peace depends upon our constructive commitment to the hundreds of thousands of poor refugees, so many men, women, and children with no place else to turn, who have been made pawns in a power struggle. It depends upon our ability and our collective commitment after this crisis has passed to help all the people of Southeastern Europe build a better future. In our last luncheon just a few moments ago, when we had all the members of our Partnership Council there, someone made a joke. He said, "Look around this room, we have several members of the last Politburo here that the Soviet Union had." And then they were counting up. And then the others said, "Well, we weren't on the Politburo, but we should have been." And they were laughing. But they made an important point. There has been this breathtaking explosion of freedom. But the old order has not yet been replaced by a new one that answers all the legitimate needs of people, not just for freedom, but also for security and prosperity. We must be committed to building that kind of future for the people of Central Europe, for the people of Southeastern Europe, and for our other partners going all the way to the Central Asian states. We cannot expect for people to stop being drawn back to old ways of organizing themselves, even profoundly destructive ways resting on ethnic and religious divisions, unless there is a far more powerful magnet out there before them. And so we committed ourselves to building that kind of future for all of our allies in the 21st century. When all is said and done, I think people will look back on this summit, perhaps many years from now, and say that was its lasting value. We looked to the future with a clear vision and made a commitment to build it. Thank you very much.